Good evening, all you Kennedy Americans out there. How you doing on this Saturday night? I'm your host, Lori Spencer. Thank you for joining us here on X Spaces. Glad to have you all here. We're going to have an amazing Twitter space tonight. I still call it Twitter. Sorry, it's X now. Welcome, everyone. We're here to talk about, of course, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And there's a lot of news in the Kennedy universe since the last time we caught up. I guess our last space was a couple of weeks ago. There's so much to cover tonight. We're going to try and make this about a 2-hour space. Last time it was a marathon. It was 6.5 hours, folks. And it was amazing. If you missed it, you can go back and catch it. We do take these Twitter spaces, we record them, and then we produce them and sweeten the audio and make them sound good. And we put them out as a podcast across a lot of different podcasting platforms to try and get this message out to as many Americans as possible. Not everybody uses Twitter, unfortunately. Some people don't use Twitter Spaces or haven't tried it yet or don't know how wonderful Spaces really is. So we like to get it out on other platforms too. We'll put it out pretty much everywhere except YouTube. If you caught our last space, you know that was all about the censorship of Robert Kennedy on the YouTube platform and his current lawsuit against Google and YouTube. And you can go back and catch that. It is in 3 parts. We broke it up into 3 different episodes of the Kennedy Americans podcast. And we ask that you subscribe to our Rumble channel because they don't censor the podcasts over there at Rumble. On YouTube, they have removed every single episode of the Kennedy Americans podcast. Every time I uploaded an episode to my YouTube channel, they would put a strike on it. And then eventually they just removed my channel altogether and censored my channel, which I'd had for years. So that's how intense the censorship of Mr. Kennedy really is on YouTube. So we've archived all the past episodes and all future episodes of the Kennedy Americans podcast will be available and are available right now on Rumble. And the channel is called, the URL is rumble.com/Kennedy Americans. And if you scroll up to the top of this space, up there in the nest, we call it, I have placed a link to that new Kennedy Americans podcast channel on Rumble. Just click that and subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we have a new episode or when we go live. Also, I've posted several articles of the news that we'll be covering tonight and the topics that we'll be covering in this space. So if you're here and you'd like to know what we're going to be talking about, just scroll up through the nest and take a look at those tweets that I've pinned to the top of the space. We will be opening the floor later to questions from the audience, comments, anything that you want to say. Just want to let everybody know that this is being recorded and it will be released as a podcast. So if you're shy or for some reason don't want your voice going out to millions of people around the world, just wanted to advise you that this is being recorded for posterity and it will be out on the internet forever and ever. And in fact, this episode will be episode 9 of the Kennedy Americans podcast. Also, before we get underway, just a brief disclaimer. I always like to do this at the top of the space. Everything you hear on this space, the opinions expressed are not necessarily those of the Kennedy 24 campaign or of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Of course, he's his own man, thinks for himself and speaks for himself. So nobody here is speaking for the campaign or for Mr. Kennedy. And I'd like to welcome now my co-host tonight. My co-host is my good friend, Nick Brana. If you've been watching Strange Bedfellows lately, you probably noticed our interview a couple of weeks back. Nick, he's like one of the smartest political analysts that I know. And we're very fortunate to have him here tonight. He brings a lot of wisdom to this space and especially to this topic. We're going to be talking a lot about the Democratic Party and these new proposed rule changes that they are set to perhaps approve as early as this week. At a meeting on the 14th. And if these new rule changes are in fact approved, it will pretty much be the end of Mr. Kennedy's campaign in the Democratic Party, at least as I see it, because it would be impossible for him to get to the nomination. And my co-host, Nick Brana, knows a lot about that. He is a veteran, former staffer of the campaigns of Terry McAuliffe, Senator John Kerry, and of course, the Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign. which of course we all know what happened there and what the Democratic Party did to Bernie Sanders. Nick kind of had his fill of the Democrats and left, I believe, in 2017, 2018, and founded an independent third party called the People's Party. And earlier this year, Nick Brana was the guy who persuaded Dr. Cornel West to enter the presidential race. As you might recall, Cornel West initially was running under the banner of the People's Party. And then a couple of weeks later, he changed his affiliation to the Green Party. Dr. West is now running with the Green Party. So I'd like to bring Nick in. Nick, you want to unmute your mic and say hello to everyone? Ladies and gentlemen, Nick Brana.
Hey, Lori. Hey, everyone. It's great to be hosting this with you, Lori. The things that are being done against RFK Jr. are just unbelievable, really unbelievable. I saw it, up close and personal, what was done to Bernie to rig that primary against him. But back then, they at least pretended that there was a facade of impartiality. They had it in their bylaws. They still do, in fact. And I know that Dennis Kucinich actually cited that when he requested a meeting with the DNC chair this week ahead of the Rules and Bylaws Committee meeting on Thursday, where they're going to deliberate these new crushing, insane set of rules that would essentially, I think, as Kennedy's described it, I've been looking for a copy of them. I have not been able to find a copy. I think, Laura, you said that there isn't a copy
I
out
haven't
there.
been able to find them. No, I don't think it's public. Not yet.
Yeah, but if it if it has that impact, I trust I trust Bobby Kennedy when he says that it's going to basically rob him from the delegates of Iowa, New Hampshire, and possibly even Georgia if he campaigns in some of those states where the DNC doesn't want him campaigning. They're early, and that is a level of rigging that goes way beyond what was done to Bernie Sanders. Like, at least they pretended at that time that they were running something impartial. The communication between the DNC and the Clinton campaign was behind the scenes. It was all hidden, and then it was released in the WikiLeaks revelations, right at the Philadelphia convention. But now, Lori, it's just unbelievably out in the open. I mean, it was 2 years ago that the DNC chair, who was handpicked, by the way, by Biden, that he announced that the DNC was 100% on the side of Joe Biden, and period, and that there wasn't going to be a primary. And then later, this February, the DNC passed a resolution. The full DNC passed a resolution saying that it endorsed Biden. And so, like, that was bad enough, but the degree to which they're going to now is just crazy. I mean, I'll pass it back to you, Lori, but I'm sure we'll talk about it. But I mean, they're effectively canceling the primary. That's what they're doing. We got to be honest about that.
It's unreal, and we are going to do a deep dive on that tonight. And I was just talking with you, Nick, before the space began, and I just wanted to ask you, do you think that, as a veteran of the Bernie 2016 campaign, do you really think that what the Dems are doing to Kennedy right now are worse than what they ever did to Bernie? And you said, hell yes. And I agree. In fact, I would go so far as to say that these proposed rule changes, if they go through with this, and what they're already doing to Kennedy, is worse than what they've ever done to any candidate in the entire history of the Democratic Party. That's how much Robert Kennedy scares the Democrats. Before we dive into that, I just want to give you guys kind of a brief idea of what's on the agenda tonight and the various topics we'll be talking about. Of course, we're going to talk a lot about the proposed DNC rule changes and what the Kennedy campaign is doing about it, trying to rectify this situation, which is so terribly unfair. And we're also going to talk a bit about President Biden and, what's the backup plan? Because we've seen Biden at least twice this week. Hardly a day goes by that President Biden doesn't have some sort of incident or other where he kind of blanks out. His brain freezes up. He forgets what he's there for, forgets what he came to say, or just rambles on with some kind of nonsense. And it's really becoming troubling. And I know it's even troubling for the elites in the Democratic Party who are trying to prop him up for one more term and one more campaign. And you take a look at the guy and you just wonder, how on earth is he even going to make it through the primaries? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about maybe what the Democrats are planning as a backup, a plan B, if Biden doesn't make it. I also want to talk, since Nick is here, and he brought Cornel West into the race. I want to talk a little bit about Cornel West's disastrous interview with Jimmy Dore this week and what the impact's going to be on his campaign, if you think it might cost him the Green Party nomination, and if that nomination is now up for grabs for another candidate. We'll be talking a lot about the possibility that Bobby Kennedy might be leaving the Democratic Party. They might leave him no choice, honestly. Depends on what they do with this rule change this week, but he may have no choice but to look at, as he said this week in an interview with Forbes, he called it other alternatives, which would mean an independent run or perhaps a third party run. So we're going to be talking about that. And also, I want to talk about, we have a special event tomorrow. Of course, as we all know, tomorrow is September the 11th. And something really cool that the Kennedy campaign is doing. I love this. Bobby has put out a call to action for all Americans to participate in a National Day of Service and Remembrance tomorrow on September 11th. And he's asked people to plan their own events, to do some kind of service to their community or to a neighbor, or just do something good for your country. It's echoing President Kennedy's call in his 1961 inaugural address, when he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And so we're going to talk about that. There are events going on all across America affiliated with the campaign. And also, if anybody out there listening has planned one of those national events on September 11th for your day of service, we would love for you to join the space later when we go to the Q&A portion. I'd love to hear you guys tell me about what you're doing in your community, in your area, and what you're doing to make America a better place. And also a plug for Mr. Kennedy's upcoming events. He's working really hard. He's out on the campaign trail every single day. He's in a different city. He's crisscrossing America. And I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about his upcoming calendar and what's going on. Tonight, Bobby is in Rock Hill, South Carolina, as we speak. I think he's just about to finish up his event there. Tomorrow night, September the 11th, he will be in Walpole, New Hampshire, participating in that September 11th National Day of Service. On this Wednesday, the 13th, he'll be in Rye, New Hampshire. And these are all meet and greets, folks. You can come out, you can meet him, you can talk to him, you can tell him what's on your mind, and you can hear him speak and, really get the Kennedy experience. I would advise you to do it early in the campaign, because as we go along, every new event in every new city, the crowds are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I think it was the event last night or the night before. The venue that they had literally wasn't big enough to hold everyone who wanted to come. So they had to find another venue at the last minute, a bigger venue. And I predict it won't be long before Mr. Kennedy is filling stadiums, and we'll be having rallies the size of Donald Trump rallies. And then Donald Trump's going to have something to worry about. Also, a really big event this Friday, September 15th. Bobby will be back home in Los Angeles. He'll be at the Wilshire Theater celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. And you can learn more about all of these events, RSVP to attend. It's always free. Of course, donations are welcomed and encouraged. You can learn more about any of these events at kennedy24.com/events. And also, we ask that you donate, because the Biden White House and the DNC are trying to bleed our campaign coffers dry, forcing Bobby to pay for his own private security because they won't give him Secret Service protection. And now there's, in these proposed DNC rule changes, they're talking about making him pay for his own primaries. We're going to go broke, folks, without your help. So please donate, buy campaign merch. If you buy a T-shirt or bumper stickers or signs or flags or whatever you buy, that goes into the campaign coffers. That's a donation, and it helps us very much. If you'd like to get involved, do an event, you can join my team of volunteers. just go to my page at kennedy24.com/Lori Spencer. And then towards the end of the space, once we've covered all of today's topics, as you can see, we've got a very full agenda of things to talk about. We're going to open up the floor to audience Q&A. And also, I want to update everybody. We'll have an update on Bobby's lawsuit. He's got so many lawsuits going right now. He's suing the Trusted News Initiative. He's suing the Daily Kos. He's suing Facebook and Meta. He's suing the Biden administration and YouTube and Google for censoring him and censoring all of us. Most importantly, our First Amendment rights are being violated. But there was a landmark decision this week in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals down in New Orleans on the Missouri versus Biden case, which was a big, big win. And as you probably know, Bobby has joined his case together with that one. So the Kennedy versus Biden case is now part of Missouri versus Biden. So this was a big win for us, and we're going to talk about that too as we go. But right now, I just want to get back into it with Nick. Let's get to our top story. It's the story that's on everybody's mind this weekend as we ponder what's going to happen this coming week. On September the 14th, the Democratic National Committee is going to meet in Washington, D.C., and they've got some proposed rule changes that spell, probably the end of his campaign in the Democratic Party if they adopt these rules. So the Kennedy campaign has reached out to the DNC twice, actually. 2 letters were sent this week from the campaign to the DNC, asking them to clarify its position on ensuring that every voter registered in a Democratic primary actually has their vote counted in the 2024 primary election. That doesn't seem like a big ask, does it, Nick?
No, you would think that that's the definition of democracy, that the Democratic Party or any political party would operate under. But it hasn't been for the Democratic Party for a long time. Some history on the Democratic Party and the primaries and how they pick their presidential nominees. The system used to be determined all the way up until the 60s, essentially by party bosses. They're essentially, there weren't meaningful primaries. The political party bosses would get in a smoke-filled room and they would pick the political party nominees for the Democratic Party. There was a lot of resistance and opposition to that following the election in 1968, which people felt there was massive protests at the election in 1968. And there was a feeling that, of course, the actual voters and the members of the Democratic Party should have more of a role in picking the candidates. So at that point, they opened up the process. It was more of a fair primary that was decided by primary voters. There was a backlash to that, just like there was a backlash against the movements for civil rights and the anti-war movement to that in the 80s. And that was when they instituted superdelegates. So the party elite basically said, we've gotten some nominees that we don't really support. We think they're too far out, from the corporate main line of the Democratic Party. It was George McGovern, namely, he was the biggest problem to them. And he was a candidate who they disagreed with in 72 so strongly that the party establishment actually worked against him. It's the same thing that would have happened. They worked against their own nominee. That would have happened if Bernie got the nomination, for example, or if Kennedy was to get the nomination. But that there's just no way that's going to happen. That's 100% clear. So they went to a superdelegate system where they allotted a certain portion of the delegates, a controlling portion essentially, of the delegates that decide who the nominee is at the national convention. And they allotted those delegates to party leaders and to elected officials, and the party maintains such control and discipline over, who those people vote for that they essentially just they vote as a block for whoever the anointed candidate is. They all vote for Hillary Clinton, so the superdelegates decided the race in 2016 between Bernie and Hillary Clinton. It wasn't the actual voters. So they went back towards that system with super delegates. In 2016, so the party elite took control of the primary once again. So in 2016 now, Bernie Sanders comes along. I worked on his campaign. I was the national political outreach coordinator, reaching out to the superdelegates and to other political prospective endorsers and helping him organize at the convention, organize delegates at the convention. And at the end of that campaign, because of the WikiLeaks revelations and the general sense that it had been rigged against Bernie Sanders, the understanding that it had been rigged against Bernie Sanders and stolen from him by the DNC, there was this thing called the Unity Reform Commission that was created. It was created as a compromise at the Philly Convention 2016 by the Clinton and the Sanders camps, that was supposed to reform the primary ahead of the 2020 election. And this was of particular interest to Bernie because he was thinking even then of running again. And so from the very moment that it was created, though, it was rigged. About 2/3 of the seats on that commission, the Unity Reform Commission, went to the Clinton camp and went to the DNC. So it was just meaningless. It was a way of just diffusing the outrage in Philadelphia and preventing people from leaving the party en masse, And Sanders went along with it, And so that's why, that ended up creating in 2017, 2018, the system whereby they moved the superdelegate vote to the second ballot. They said, okay, it's on the second ballot. And now it's not, and they said, we've gotten rid of the superdelegates. Even Bernie said that. He said, we got rid of the superdelegates, emailed
but that
all the
wasn't
supporters.
Really true. That wasn't really true, though, was it?
It wasn't. It was a lie.
Right.
It was a lie. And so they still have the superdelegates today. And, there was a very, very telling moment in the debate in Nevada in the 2020 primary, where there was like a moment, there was like a week where Bernie won Iowa, he won New Hampshire despite massive rigging, and then he got to Nevada, he won Nevada, and there was a week where it's like, holy shit, Bernie could win, and then of course Obama made the phone calls, everybody dropped out. They had, they made Biden kind of, the nominee, they anointed him, and so he went ahead and won. But in that debate in Nevada, there was a very telling moment where all the candidates were on stage and they asked, the media asked, the moderators, they asked Bernie and the other candidates, who among you supports the voters deciding who the nominee is going to be, in the end? And only Bernie raised his hand. Every other candidate, did not. And that was the whole sense of the rest of the party too. And that's the same sensibility that has always pervaded the party's establishment and elite and the DNC. And so that is what's leading them now to create rules that go way beyond what they did to Bernie, to rig the process to a degree where you can't even call it, a primary anymore. The rigging is out in the open. As I mentioned before, the communication between the DNC and the Hillary Clinton camp, the coordination, the collusion between them, it was all done behind the scenes because that was not supposed to be taking place. Today, that is taken for granted. It's taken for granted that you're going to manipulate the primary schedule. You're going to put South Carolina first, All of that is taken for granted. So, the rigging is just completely out in the open. And, now the kinds of rules that they're discussing where it's like, we're actually going to take delegates that were won by Kennedy and we're going to give them to Biden in Iowa, in New Hampshire, in these early primary states. I mean, it's just a joke. And there comes a point where, as a candidate, I think that Kennedy has to reflect and say, I can no longer approach my own supporters in a self-respecting fashion and tell them that what they're supporting by supporting this campaign is something that has a realistic chance of winning, that we're being given a fair shot, And I think that's where we're at now, is that can no longer be said. Whether this rules change passes on Thursday or not, it is 100% clear that the DNC, by even considering this and all the other changes they've already made, is not going to give Bobby Kennedy a fair shot.
They just could not be telegraphing that any louder than they are.
Yes. And the last thing I wanted to say was that, to put into context how outrageous this is, as he said, he would have to win 80% of the delegates,
Yep.
80% of the vote, and Biden would only have to win 20 in order for Biden to win the nomination. With all of the automatic delegates, the super delegates, the rigging, that's insane. I mean, it's
That's
just a
outrageous.
farce.
Absolutely
Exactly.
outrageous. It is. And, I wanted to ask you, since you were there, at least in the 2016 campaign of Bernie Sanders, when the DNC was trying to finagle some things and change some rules, did the Bernie campaign do what the Kennedy campaign is doing now, reaching out and meeting with the DNC and trying to at least talk them into being fair? Was there an effort made?
There wasn't enough of an effort made, but there
Mm,
was an effort. Jeff Weaver, the campaign manager in 2016, he reached out. He tried to meet um, with the DNC chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz, but none of that accomplished anything.
mm.
And Bernie did occasionally call it out, but that was the problem: is that the Bernie really didn't have the guts to call it out as much as he should have. He never called out the rigging to the degree that he should have, and I really hope that the Kennedy campaign, you know, doesn't make that same mistake and that they call it out very strongly. I think as they've started to just very recently with the Jesse Waters interview and on Forbes.
That's right. And, that interview with Jesse Waters, Dennis Kucinich was on Waters World, I think Friday night. And I've pinned the video. I hope everybody will go watch that interview with Dennis Kucinich. The way Jesse put it, and I agree, he said Joe Biden has just ordered a political hit on RFK Jr. Those are strong words, but I agree with them. I think he's absolutely right. I wanted to talk a little bit more about what the campaign is doing right now, this week, to try and set this right with the DNC, to try and get a fair shake. Now, I don't know if this meeting has been accepted by the DNC, but twice this week now, Dennis Kucinich has reached out to the DNC, to Julie Chavez Rodriguez, the manager of Joe Biden's campaign in the DNC, and he's hoping that Mr. Harrison will agree to this meeting. In his letter, he noted that Article 5, Section 4 of the DNC Charter states, and I quote, "In the conduct and management of the affairs and procedures of the Democratic National Committee, particularly as they apply to the preparation and conduct of the presidential nomination process, the chairperson shall exercise impartiality and even-handedness as between the presidential candidates and campaigns." So the DNC's proposed reordering of these early state primaries, it's done to penalize the states that didn't vote for Joe Biden in 2020. It would discount the votes of millions of Americans, and it would limit the ballot access of millions more to mail-in voting only. Now, the states currently at risk of such disenfranchisement include New Hampshire, where Biden, by the way, came in last in 2020, if you remember, receiving 0 delegates; Iowa, where Biden came in 4th in the 2020 primaries; and Georgia, which is one of the most diverse states in the country. And obviously, we see that. Just look at how the 2020 election went for President Trump in the state of Georgia. So beyond the direct discounting of votes from some states, the Kennedy campaign plans to question the DNC's creation of, get this, a new class of superdelegates. Here we go again. They would be empowered to overturn the vote of the people and hand the nomination to the favored candidate of the party elites. Now, at this point, we assume that that favored candidate will be Joe Biden, but maybe it won't be. And we'll talk about that as we go along tonight. The DNC's charter says, quote, "A party which asks for the people's trust must prove that it trusts the people." And we're doing just the opposite. As Nick just said, in accordance with that principle, the presidential primary process was reformed in 2016 after the WikiLeaks revelations exposed what they were doing to Bernie Sanders. And supposedly they reformed it to remove superdelegates from the first round of voting to ensure that party elites did not change the outcome of the people's vote. But as Dennis Kucinich says right here, I'll just quote him, unfortunately, it appears that the DNC has created a class of pledged delegates called party leaders and elected officials. That's PLEOs, PLEOs, who are essentially the same as superdelegates due to the amount of control the party exercises over elected officials. So you're kind of getting the idea of how this works. Kucinich continues, he says, this puts the DNC once again in the position of overturning the will of voters across the United States. It is unclear, he says, how overturning the nation's majority vote could be interpreted as trusting the people. And I'll read you a little bit later on the full letter that Dennis Kucinich wrote this week to DNC chair Jamie Harrison. And, you know, Kennedy has also personally voiced his concern about the DNC's refusal to host debates between the Democratic candidates, which deprives Democratic voters the ability to make an informed choice about the nation's future. And of course, on top of that, they have said that, you know, if these new rule changes are adopted, they say that Kennedy is costing the Democrats too much money, wanting to run, you know, against President Biden. Funny, they're not blaming Marianne Williamson, though. Isn't that funny? I haven't heard them say a word about how Marianne Williamson's being a thorn in their side, right? So I don't know if they're going to make Marianne and Bobby pay for their own primaries, but my God, the campaign will go broke, and Kennedy's having to spend
And
a
it's
Fullerton
basically a
once
poll
again.
tax for campaigns.
Good point. It is. Yeah, it is. And the Biden White House, the administration, has denied Kennedy Secret Service protection for the first time in history, Nick. That's what amazes me. Of all of our history since we've had Secret Service protection for presidential candidates, the reason we have it, unfortunately, is because of the murder of Bobby's dad in 1968 when Robert Kennedy was assassinated on the campaign trail in Los Angeles. The very next day, President Lyndon Johnson, you know, got Congress to, you know, pass the law. And now, you know, the law, if you follow the letter of the law, it says that they're entitled to Secret Service protection 120 days before the election. But you have to remember that campaigns were very different in 1968. They didn't last for 2 years. Most campaigns lasted about 6 to 8 months. We didn't have these long campaigns. So back then that seemed reasonable, 120 days before the election. But now in the 21st century, as you all know, campaigns start 1 or 2 years in advance of the election. And it seems to me that every candidate should be entitled to that protection pretty much from day one of their campaign. Certainly, any candidate with the last name of Kennedy, that should be an automatic yes. I mean, just an automatic yes. Of course, we'll give you Secret Service protection. That's what Jimmy Carter did for Bobby's uncle, Senator Ted Kennedy, and he hated Ted Kennedy. And Ted Kennedy didn't like him either, and they were bitter enemies. Kennedy was challenging President Carter in 1980 for the Democratic nomination. Now, there were no debates, though, that year. It is tradition, if you have an incumbent president who's going to be the likely nominee, that there usually aren't any debates. But still, Kennedy is calling for Joe Biden to debate him anyway. Why not? Well, I think we all know why not. If you saw the video that I posted up there in the nest of what happened today with President Biden, once again, his brain froze up. It's like, you know, when your computer freezes up and you get the little spinning circle going around and around and around. That's what it's like sometimes watching our president try to make a speech. He was doing a speech in Vietnam today, and it just went really off the rails. If you want to see it, I pinned the video to the nest here at the top. So, Nick, talk to me. Tell me what you think about what's going to happen with Biden. Do you think he'll make it through the primaries? Do you think he will step aside? And do you think they have someone waiting in the wings, a plan B to replace Biden with? And who do you think it might be?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because you have to ask yourself, the steps that they're taking are so egregious that are they almost trying to push Kennedy out and potentially Williamson out, to try to have like a Gavin Newsom swoop in because they say, oh my goodness, Biden's just he's collapsing, he's falling apart in front of us. So that is a possibility, I think, and I do think that is also the context, of course, behind why this is happening and why they're kind of kicking it into high gear, the rigging, and, doing such outrageous things like considering making him pay for the primary, or, a modern poll tax for campaigns, or this thing about taking delegates for him or adding the Plios, um, the automatic delegates. I saw a poll today, it was a CNN poll, that said that two-thirds of Democrats, and independent-leaning Democrats, believe that there should be a different nominee in the Democratic Party. Two-thirds.
That's
That's
right. And
incredible.
every poll I've seen across the board is about that same number, 70 to 75%.
Yeah, it's incredible. And 80% of people, which means it's even more people, than believe that he shouldn't be the nominee, believe that he's too old for the role. And how could you not, with what you were saying, Lori? I mean, every week, it's something that happens now. Either he's like, running into a wall, or he's walking out of a ceremony in the middle of it, or he's trying to shake hands with an invisible like figure. He's like just sticking his hand out
Or
and nobody's
talking to
there.
dead people or falling down. And I mean,
Right.
it's happened twice just this week alone. It's getting very concerning.
It is. And of course, I totally agree with you. That's the reason that they don't want him to debate. They can't have him, debate anybody. And, of course, how is he supposed to, debate Trump or whomever else, if that's the case? But I do want to bring up another crucial piece of context, that is the DNC fraud lawsuit. The DNC fraud lawsuit, all the way back in 2017, should have been the final nail in the coffin for anybody who thought that you could work in the Democratic Party. Um, some Bernie supporters, Jared and Elizabeth Beck, lawyers in Florida, sued the DNC for rigging the primary because the DNC is supposed to run an impartial presidential primary. It's in their charter and bylaws. Those segments that you just read, Lori, are from their charter and bylaws, and they haven't changed since then. It still says you have to run an impartial presidential primary, and that the DNC can't take sides. Well, the DNC's lawyer, Bruce Spiva, argued in that trial that the DNC is in fact a private corporation, and it doesn't have to abide by its own rules and bylaws. It doesn't have to abide by its charter. It can in fact pick the candidates irrespective of what happens in the primary. That the primary is essentially just a facade. All of this it's in court. It's in court documentations. So at that point, there should have been no doubt whatsoever that the DNC can and will go to whatever extent is necessary to cheat a candidate. Now, they're smart about this. The way they go about this is they're smart. They don't just kind of say the primary's canceled. They don't just outright say that, because that would be too overt. It would be too obvious. They want people to stay in the party. They don't want people to leave. So what they do is they adjust the rigging to just the right level that is required to deny the person the primary. And so then you get Bernie Sanders, getting 13 million votes in 2016, feeling like he came close in 2020 and there's first three primary states. So then you can see it's like, oh, well, shucks, we almost made it. Next time we'll get there. But in reality, if they had needed to go further, they would have. It's a game.
And you know what? It's the same game that they play. I have to interject this point.
Yeah.
It's the same game that they're playing with the censorship. Not just of Mr. Kennedy, but of anyone who challenges the approved narrative on social media. We know now that the Biden administration and the Trump administration, reached out to social media companies, told them exact accounts by name, who to take down, who to throttle, who to shadow ban, who to silence, basically. And that would be a clear violation of the First Amendment. And indeed, in the Missouri versus Biden case, in the Kennedy versus Biden case just this week, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed that it was a violation of the First Amendment. But it's just like the DNC doesn't violate their own charter technically. They don't go so far as to cancel primaries. They just find ways to kind of rig it because they're a private company and they can do what they want. That's the exact same argument that they make, that YouTube makes, that Facebook makes, that, every time they ban somebody, they say, well, we're a private company. We can do what we want. The part they don't tell you, of course, is that it's the government ordering them to do it. And it's not like they disagree. I mean, the people who run most of these social media companies are themselves woke Democrats, Biden Democrats. They were pro lockdowns, pro mandates, pro mask mandates, all that stuff during COVID. They were more than happy to censor you, is what I'm saying. It's not like they put up a fight when they were told to censor you. They agreed with it. They totally agreed. They share the same mindset. And it's the same sneaky way, just like the Biden administration and the Democrats love to find ways around the Constitution. They find ways around the First Amendment. They do the same thing with their own damn bylaws.
It's kind of like, Lori, when you sign one of those terms of service agreements, those like massive 50-page terms of service agreements that nobody
reads. The ones
reads.
that nobody ever reads.
The ones that nobody reads, but where it says we can change the terms at any time, where that's one of the lines. Yeah, that's what the Democratic primary is like, And we put out a statement when Bobby announced that he was going to, potentially be running in the Democratic Party. We put out a statement saying they're never going to let you have, that the nomination there. They're going to do what they did to Bernie, except, to an even greater degree if necessary. And, crucially, that they're going to change the rules mid-primary. Anybody, I think it's like a basic concept. Probably when you're like 5 years old, you can understand that it's like when you're in a contest or playing a game, the rules should be fixed from the beginning, right? If one of the players can change the rules like in the middle of the game, then it's not a game. It's a facade. It's an illusion. And that's what I think we're going through now.
And I wanted to point out, because you often do, in our interview on Strange Bedfellows a couple of weeks back, we were talking about the Beck lawsuit when they sued the DNC. And it's important to point out because people often get this wrong. They say that Bernie sued the DNC for doing him dirty, but Bernie had nothing to do with that lawsuit. Can you explain that?
Bernie had nothing to do. Oh, yeah. No. Unfortunately, Bernie had nothing to do. Unfortunately, despite, to the chagrin of many of us who had worked on the campaign, supported the campaign, were delegates, Bernie took the opposite tack. I mean, this was a big problem. He refused to call out the rigging. And this gets to a really a key difference between Bernie and Trump in 2016. They had night and day different approaches to how they related to the political party establishment in 2016.
Right.
Bernie said, hey, if you cheat me, I'm going to endorse the establishment candidate. Okay? I want to make that clear. All right. So so they were like, okay, that's a nice incentive structure you created for us. And they cheated him. And Trump was like, if you cheat me, I'm going to run independent, and and fuck your party, and that created the opposite. And so they were like, holy shit. And they tried to make him sign this agreement and everything. And there was this whole debacle over it, like after he said, no, I might not support the eventual nominee at one of the debates. And, that gave him the leverage to actually be able to run, in that primary in the first place. Now, I think
right.
in Kennedy's case, I think we're beyond that. I don't think there's literally anything that could be done or said or any kind of leverage that could be exerted. I think the only path, if Kennedy wants to continue the campaign, is really to go independent at this point.
I couldn't agree more. I left the Democratic Party in 1992 because I'm really old, folks. I mean, I'm an old school Kennedy Democrat. I was out campaigning for Senator Ted Kennedy in 1980. That's how old I am. I left in 1992 because, in my mind, the Clintons and their ilk ruined the Democratic Party, and the party left me. Those Kennedy values, those FDR values that made me a Democrat in the first place, were just gone. They just no longer existed in the Democratic Party. So I got wise to this a long, long, long time ago. I've been a libertarian ever since, longtime libertarian, voted libertarian in practically every election, with the exception of Ron Paul, because he chose to run as a Republican. So I did have to change my voter registration every time that Dr. Paul ran, and Dr. Paul was my representative from the 14th District of Texas. And of course, I voted for him every time, even though I'm not a Republican, because he's a good man. And I vote for the person, not the party. That's a principle over party. And that's why I'm a third party voter. I think that's why a lot of people listening to the space tonight also are no longer members of the Democratic Party, if they ever were. And maybe they left the Republican Party. So I thought I would take the pulse of the people tonight. I started a poll, and I hope that if you haven't voted yet, I hope that you do vote in this poll. It's very important. And we will forward the final results to Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Kucinich so that they can consider what the people think when they make their decision as to their future direction for this campaign. I hope you'll share the poll. I'm really trying to make it fair. I want it to go out across, to people of all political stripes, Republicans, Democrats, Greens, Libertarians, Independents. So if you click on that poll there at the top, at the nest, you'll see that right now we've got almost 1,200 votes. The poll is still open for 4 more days. And I mean, the independents are carrying this poll big time. 63% of respondents say that Kennedy should run as an independent with no party affiliation at all. And I think that is right in line with the poll numbers we've been seeing, Nick. Recent polls have shown that if the 2024 matchup is going to be Biden versus Trump, that I think the number is between 56 and 60% of Americans say that they would consider a third option, an independent option. And boy, this poll is right in line with all the other polls that I've seen. Again, 63% say that he should run independent, which is stunning to me. It's stunning also that only 17% say that he should run as a Democrat. 9% say that he should change parties and run as a Republican. And then third party, unfortunately on Twitter, they only give you 4 options in the poll. So I couldn't list all the various third parties that he might run with. The fourth option was third party. 11% of the people who responded said that he should run with a third party. And I asked them to drop their comments as to which party they'd like to see him run with. Got a lot of people saying he should run with the People's Party, Nick. What do you think about that? You guys need a candidate.
Well, I think that would be awesome in a lot of ways. There's a lot that I respect about Bobby Kennedy, his crusade against censorship, surveillance, the fact that he's one of the only candidates, in fact, I think the only candidate, I tried to get Cornel West to talk about it, but he wouldn't, that will talk about existential risk. There are civilization, humanity level planetary risks to us now. And he talks about them. He talks about engineered superviruses, nuclear war, artificial intelligence. I heard him discuss that on Lex Friedman's podcast. So in all of those respects, he has this really acute, I think, understanding of the emerging technological dystopia that is being constructed. This emerging brave new World Economic Forum type, prison with CBDCs, digital currencies, where everything is monitored and controlled. And in that respect, I think he is an amazing candidate. There are some things that we disagree with him on from the People's Party's perspective. For example, and we said this in our initial kind of response to when he announced he was thinking of running. For example, we would love to see him run on Medicare for all. I don't entirely understand why he hasn't taken up that issue. About 88% of Democrats support it. And it also has a majority of Republicans supporting and about 70% total. And of course, he's such a champion for healthcare when it comes to, the explosion of autoimmune issues, all of these different chemicals that are being added to our foods, that are being used in preservatives, that are being, sprayed on crops. He's such a strong advocate there. Of course, also he's such a strong advocate for health when it comes to vaccine safety that to me, it doesn't make sense to me why he hasn't picked up Medicare for all as an issue that globally is shown to improve health dramatically and would have cut the deaths from COVID by 2/3 in this country. There's other issues, of course, with Palestine. Would like to see him support abolishing rather than, reforming kind of the CIA. We've tried to reform the CIA for decades.
Absolutely.
Uh, we think that it should be abolished. The CIA, NATO, as you're dismantling the empire, there were all these institutions, these deep state institutions, CIA, the NSA, NATO, that were constructed when the US became this global hegemony and empire. Those should be really taken away as we remove that empire, return those resources to the people, stop sending our blood and treasure, abroad, then we should dismantle those institutions. So we have some disagreements with him that I do want to mention. And I do want to mention the philosophy behind that too. That is that one of the things that I was certainly impressed upon me with Bernie and with Cornel West was when you support a particular candidate, there is a impulse to treat it like a team sport. There's an impulse to say like, oh, it would be unpatriotic or disloyal to criticize my candidate, or to disagree with them in any way, because they're getting all this heat from the establishment and whatever, and so I just, I got to kind of like stay mum on the disagreements. And I think that that is entirely wrong. I think that it's healthy and necessary and helps improve the candidate and more open and honest to discuss the points of disagreement because that's
Right.
how
And
the
yeah,
candidate
wasn't
gets
that
better.
exactly the point of Jimmy Dore's interview with Cornel West this week?
I think it
As he
was.
kept saying over and over in the interview, Cornel, I tell you this with love. He supports Cornel West, but he wants to make him a better candidate, to tailor his message to what the people want. And I, at least that's what I got out of his interview with Dr. West. And that's why we host these Twitter spaces independent of the Kennedy campaign so that people can feel free to truly speak their minds. We don't have to censor ourselves because we're on YouTube. Fortunately, X will let us talk about whatever we want. We can post it on Rumble so that there's no censorship of sensitive topics. And yes, in any campaign, you're absolutely right. There have been some emails circulating just this week of people within the Kennedy campaign, telling other people to hush, don't talk about it. And I'm like, well, of course we're going to talk about it. The Democratic Party is trying to kill our campaign. Do you think we're not going to talk about it? Mr. Kennedy's talking about it. Dennis Kucinich is talking about it. And we're talking about it a hell of a lot more than Bernie Sanders ever talked about it in 2016 or 2020, when the whole process was clearly rigged against him and there was a mountain of evidence. But he never sued the DNC. He never spoke up. He didn't challenge the system. And props to Donald Trump because he actually did. And he did contest the 2020 election when he felt that it was stolen from him. And he was entitled to feel that way. It was a very close election. There were shenanigans that went on. And yet, not a court in this country would let his lawyers into the courtroom to argue the case, including the Supreme Court. So that's how hopeless things actually are, ladies and gentlemen. And if you were with us on that Twitter space 2 weeks ago, where we talked about the censorship case that Bobby has going against YouTube and Google, once again, you have a judge who's very ideologically driven, a Biden appointed judge. And this judge is not giving Kennedy a fair hearing. And she's already told him how she's going to rule. She said in her preliminary ruling that this case is unlikely to prevail on the merits. So just like the Democrats are sending Kennedy a message now, we don't want you in our party. We don't like you. We don't agree with anything that you stand for. We think you're a MAGA guy. We think you're a Republican. That's one of their favorite smears to use against him. But, Nick, I don't consider that a smear. And I'm not a Republican. I'm not a MAGA person at all. But I want Bobby to beat Trump. Um, but, I love that conservatives are happy with Kennedy. I love that they're donating to our campaign. To me, that's how you heal the divide. That's how you bring us together. And that's the whole problem in this country. That's why our campaign slogan is heal the divide. And that's what
And
we're
to
here to
what
do.
and to what you said, Lori, I completely agree. Is people are so fed up of these fake populists that come around, for so long that there's Obama, he campaigned on ending the wars. He was going to stop the torture. He was going to get the special interest money out of politics. Turned out to be a total fraud, total Wall Street controlled fraud. Bernie Sanders comes around. He basically runs on the same message. Including Medicare for all, going to get the special interest money out of politics, end the wars. People, yeah, again, turns out to be a total fraud. Can't even admit the rigging of its own supporters. And Trump, of course, Trump came in and promised a lot of populist things as well. And at the end of the day, he just folded. He folded to the establishment in so many different ways. To the deep state. And of course the things that only ended up happening essentially was he cut corporate taxes and all the things that the billionaire ruling class wanted in the first place. That was the major takeaway. And so at this point, people really want someone who is going to fight for them like their life depends on it. Because people out there, their life depends on it. We're paying more for food and gas while we're sending, while every other week we're seeing, how many billions more are being sent to Ukraine. People can't afford healthcare. They don't have good jobs. Our wages are crushed. I really think that song "Rich Men North of Richmond" really is the zeitgeist today, bringing people to from across the political spectrum together. That's how we feel, and we want someone who's going to fight with that spirit, not someone who's going to fold over like another Bernie Sanders or whoever it is. And so that's what I think that Bobby Kennedy has the chance to do right now. We don't agree with him, and I don't agree with him personally, whether it be it the People's Party, myself, on every issue. But if he goes independent now, people are going to see him as a fighter. And he is going to be able to, I think, rally so much support from across the political spectrum. Like you pointed out, Lori, he has more support. I looked at a different poll. He has more support from Republicans and independents than he does from Democrats. Amazing. Bring that together and really focus that energy against the establishment. And you know what? Maybe once he's free of the crutches of the Democratic Party, those of us who do have some disagreements with him, like myself and the People's Party, maybe then he will be more free to even be more openly antagonistic against the establishment because there will be nothing holding him back. That is certainly my hope. So at this point, I think it's the only path. It is the only path that allows him to honestly continue campaigning, going to all these different events and talking to people and saying genuinely, I'm fighting for you.
I have one concern. Well, I have a couple of concerns about an independent campaign. I know that there's a groundswell for it. I know that that's what it seems a majority of the American people want. They're ready to finally smash the two-party system. I've been waiting 30 years for this moment, so it's great. I love to see it. But as we know, the system is in fact rigged against independent candidates as well. It's so hard to get ballot access in all 50 states if you're an independent candidate. Although, as you pointed out to me, it's actually a little easier for independents rather than third parties to get ballot access, but it's still a challenge. And also, and perhaps most importantly, independent candidates are not really allowed to take part in the presidential debates. As some of you might recall, if you're old like me, you might remember the 1992 independent campaign of Ross Perot. And Ross Perot did exceedingly well for an independent candidate, the best any independent had done since the election of 1912 and Teddy Roosevelt. I think Ross Perot got 20 or 21% of the vote in the general election. And he did really well in those debates. If you go back there on YouTube, you can watch the debates between Bill Clinton and then incumbent President George H.W. Bush and Ross Perot. It was a three-way debate. And Ross Perot really, really did well. I think that's why he got so many votes, is he won him over in the debates. So the next election cycle in 1996, the Commission on Presidential Debates changed the rules, and those rules pretty much prohibit independent candidates from getting on that debate stage. It's very hard to qualify. Of course, we all know that the Commission on Presidential Debates is run by the two big parties. Naturally, they have a vested interest in keeping independent candidates and independent voices off the stage. As some of you might recall, back in 2000, Ralph Nader was running, and he was also not able to qualify for the debates. He showed up at one of the debates. Someone at Fox News gave him a guest pass so that he could at least get in the building. And he was just trying to, once again ask, hey, can I participate in the debate? And they threw him out, guys. They threw him out of the venue, literally threatened to arrest Ralph Nader if he didn't leave. And so instead of getting arrested, Ralph chose to leave of his own accord so that he wouldn't go to jail that night. But that's how serious they really are about keeping independent voices down and not giving them a microphone at the debates. Any thoughts on that, Nick?
Yeah, as a general rule, the establishment parties are not going to allow you to debate unless they think it's in your interest. Um, and now it's even worse than it used to be because the RNC actually quit the Presidential Commission on Debates. And so the organization that, was organizing the presidential debates really, has lost one of the parties to it. And so now the only debates that are going to happen are probably going to be through some sort of bilateral agreement between the DNC and the RNC and the campaigns. And so uh, there really isn't going to be anything serious. But I'm very glad actually that you promoted Christina, because I was going to say that she probably would be like the best person to ask this question to, because she's hosted independent debates for the last 15 years.
Yes, I'm so glad that
Independent
Christina
presidential
is
debates.
here because she is just the right person to talk to about this. I'd like to bring in as a speaker Christina Tobin of Free and Equal, because we are working on a series of upcoming debates for some of these candidates who are excluded from the debate platforms. Christina, you want to tell people a little bit about what we've got going on?
Yes. Hey, Lori, Nick, thank you so much for putting this together and having me on. Lori, I love what you do and everything that you both stand for. So grateful. Thank you again.
Love you back.
Yes, we've been hosting. I run a national nonprofit called Free and Equal Elections. And yes, Ralph Nader, in 2008, I served as his national ballot access coordinator, spearheaded his entire ballot drive to get on the ballot as an independent for president, and succeeded in 45 states plus DC, got him on the ballot. We didn't have money for all 50 states. I'm confident we would have achieved that had we had the funds. Many may recall in 2004, Ralph was wrongfully knocked off the ballot by the Democratic Party when he broke away from the Green Party in 2000, ran independent 2004, and the Democrats knocked him off the ballot in 32 states. So to take on that ballot drive in 2008, Ralph even told me directly, being quite a relentless individual, that he felt there was no way I could get him on the ballot. Well, I did, because I know how to organize a team. I did not do it on my own. It was the coordinators, the circulators that worked so hard on the ground to make that happen. And the reason I bring this up is because after succeeding with the team that I built as an organizer, you are who you surround yourself with, Ralph created this rally called Open the Debates Rally. Sean Penn was there. I think it was in Colorado. It's hard to remember which state. Maybe it's been so long. Yeah, Colorado.
I remember that. Yes,
yeah,
I remember. That was awesome.
Sean Penn was there. I met this guy named Jesse the Body Ventura, and he's like, yeah, I've won governor, Minnesota. Why? Because I got into the debates. And we know Jesse Ventura. That's pretty cool. Reform Party, and overcame the odds. And that was when Ralph taught me, standing in front of the DNC. I was with him. One of the few moments I had him to myself, because everybody else forgot their past to get into DNC, but Ralph and I. And he looked at all of the press and looked at me and said, Christina, I could interview with every member of the press here right now, and that would only reach 2 to 3% of the population of what the Commission on Presidential Debates would reach. And so, Lori, for you to mention that, both of you on this call, on this Twitter, it's just very much the case. And that sparked the creation of Free and Equal Elections, where we organized and hosted. Chris Hedges came in very last minute. We had independent Ralph Nader and Chuck Baldwin of the Constitution Party. Then we had our debate at the Mayflower in DC, and this is the first time historically any presidential debate has been nationally televised outside of the mainstream. Not so mainstream anymore, right? Commission on Presidential Debates. So it is truly a fraudulent platform. That's why the League of Women Voters, as you sure are aware, created originally the debates, but then the CPD, Lou Farag, all these corrupt in the pharmaceutical, military industrial, like they took over, co-opted the debate, stole it from the League of Women Voters. And when you look it up online, you'll see the League of Women Voters, the United States, state that the Commission on Presidential Debates has perpetuated a fraud on the American voters. So to answer your question, there's a little bit of a backstory there. In 2012, broadcast legend Larry King, he stepped up to the plate and we co-moderated Free and Equal's presidential debate in 2012, reaching tens of millions, people, as well as top 10 trending on Twitter. And in 2016, Lou Grant of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, he stepped in as our co-moderator as well. Him and I co-moderate our presidential debate. 2020, we had 3 live debates. I co-moderated them all myself during a lockdown year, of which our first debate ever we did before the primary. We had 18 candidates from 10 different political parties participate in our debate. So we definitely opened it up a bit too much, and had so many people want to be at our debates, which was just an honor. And now we are ramping up for a presidential debate series. We're finalizing the date as early as the date sometime as early as the end of this year. Early December is what we're looking at, tentative. And we have a confirmed moderator to be announced in the next couple weeks, and very excited about that, because the need for not only a presidential debate and bringing candidates across the spectrum is needed more than ever, because these conversations, that's what happens at our debates. This is not a fight, not an argument. This is about having conversations of love and compassion, respecting one another's ideas. And David definitely brings some comedy and humor into it. We're going to, fortunately, with our moderator, won't say much more than that, because comedy is key, and humor, of course, because we are in very serious times.
Because this whole thing is a joke.
We're very serious times, but we gotta have a little bit of fun uniting our country, right? And truly having a lot of fun, actually. So that is, it's exciting. We have some big announcements in the queue coming, and working with so many wonderful individuals, yourself, Nick, the whole coalition around the Rage Against the War Machine rally. What an honor, Nick, you and Angela McCardle, chair also of the Libertarian Party, and many others here, Lori and others, and coalition. Dr. Irene Mavrakis, I gotta get her last names pronounced right. So, but just the whole coalition to make that a reality and really be a spark and helping to ensure that this debate continues on. So, yeah, it's a kickoff for the series. And finally, there is over 100 candidates running for president. We are going to have a blockchain voting app being coded and developed by Colin Cantrell of Nexus.io. Check out his website, Nexus.io. His dad was like VP or co-founder of SpaceX with Elon Musk. So he's just a brilliant genius in the work that he does. And through instant runoff voting, the people are going to decide who are the top 6 candidates they want to have in this debate. We're looking at early December. With not only myself as a co-moderator and an individual to be announced soon, but possibly a third moderator we're seeking. So this is a kickoff in an independent movement. And Bobby Kennedy has told me himself directly that he feels, and I agree with him, we've agreed, this was a couple days ago, that the Democratic Party is pushing him, wants him and pushing him to run third party so that it splits the votes with Trump and benefits Biden. And I don't think Robert F. Kennedy is going to take the bait. So independent, I agree with you, Nick and Lori. It is the only way that Robert F. Kennedy has any chance of winning. And with an independent movement ignited beyond even Kennedy, it's bigger than one person, the Marianne Williamson and Cornel West, and all invited to the party. Because as of right now, were not invited to the party, and they have rigged the system to leave third parties and independents out in the cold, and we're going to change that. There's a lot of hope on the horizon.
That's right. And I forgot to mention earlier, my friend Nita Stewart, who's the Florida field coordinator with the Kennedy campaign, when I was talking about when they almost arrested Ralph Nader back in 2000, I think they did actually arrest Jill Stein, didn't they, when she tried to get into the debates?
Yeah, guess who got her ticket?
Who?
I did. I got her ticket. I saw her arrested, and it breaks my heart to this day that they did that. It was so wrong. And as she was being taken to the cop car, she handed off her ticket, and I sat in her seat. It was this feeling of sweet sorrow. I don't even know how. I was like, I am definitely called to continue to build these presidential debates. And I have seen another candidate for governor back in Lauren, the name, I meant to look it up before this call, but I saw her wrongfully arrested as well, and very aware of Ralph's situation. He doesn't want to have any history. He's, of ever being arrested, and that's his own prerogative. And I totally get it, why he did what he did. So, it's definitely time for a true debate that's here for we, the people, to rise, and not really a debate. I mean, we call our debate, but it's a forum. Like, the candidates are here to have conversations, and we use the cumulative format. So our debates do not promote by any means candidates interrupting with one another. They all have to take turns, opening 2 minute, closing 2 minutes statements, and then you have X amount to answer each question, and a rebuttal and or extended time. So it really engages us to have a nice conversation. Again, I really believe that love wins in the end, and there are more of us than there are of them. And I live by the words of Pete Seeger: we are not afraid, and we shall overcome.
Yes, we shall. And I love what you're doing with these debates. I've been following them for years. Obviously, I'm a longtime third party voter, and you were the only people who would give my candidates a stage. So thank you for that. And thank you for doing it again this year. I know we can't really talk about the moderators, the panel that we're working on, but folks, believe me, if they say yes, this is going to be huge. It's going to go out to millions of people. We might even draw a larger audience just using the internet than all of the big networks combined for the big televised debates next fall. So,
Lori, if I may, we do have a moderator that has already confirmed and said yes. It's just a matter of it being announced as we are developing a new website with Free and Equal, the splash page. Also the give butter, because it's not going to be big money funding this. It's going to be everybody on here giving what they can to support a truly independent movement. I have been in this arena for 25 years, since I was 17. I'm 42 years of age, starting off a decade gathering and collecting and coordinating signatures in the corrupt Chicago Board of Elections. I've been around the Rahm Emanuel, Michael Madigan, even saw Obama when he ran for Senate. Every single competitor knocked off the ballot, and I'm like, who is this guy? They're going to run him for president one day, and look what happened. So it was slated. I saw it inside the corrupt Chicago Board of Elections, and we do have a confirmed moderator. I'm excited to announce, it's the first time I've said this at all publicly, that we have a confirmed moderator. And that
I know who it is, but I won't say yet.
I know, but it's not pending anymore. It is a yes. He has confirmed a date available, venues available, and we're just waiting on one more moderator to join, but we're proceeding no matter, because it's going to be it's going to be a people powered movement, truly. And the consistency of what I have built in the team throughout the decades in the making is so deeply rooted, because you do not build a movement overnight, and we have a long-term solution-based direction as to where this not only presidential debate series will go, but we've also been hosting United We Stand Festival since 2014. So we're going to be bringing the artists and thought leaders and coalitions and organizations and conscious companies into the series, and really breaking out into a United We Stand tour into 25 and 26. We're going to replace most, if not every, member of Congress, because that is the root of the problem, beyond far more important, those races, than the presidential race. And so I think Kennedy and the others I mentioned, and many more of all the parties, the People's, the Libertarian, the Constitution, the America, it could be Natural Law Party, to the Green Party, are all invited to this truly independent movement for the people.
And I notice as I look through who's here in this space, I see that in addition to Nick, of course, with the People's Party, we also have representatives here from the Forward Party, Andrew Yang's Forward Party. We also have representatives here from the Libertarian Party. Hello, Libertarians. I actually invited Angela McArdle, who's the national chair of the Libertarian Party, to speak in this space tonight. I hope she can make it because I would love to get perspective from, people in the third party movement too. If you guys want Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as your candidate in 2024, now's the time to speak up. Now's the time to make your pitch. This week is decision time for the campaign, and much of that decision is, of course, going to be informed by how the DNC behaves with these proposed rule changes. So if there's anyone here from any other third party who would like to speak and let us hear your pitch, please do send me a speaker's request, raise your hand, and I'll bring you up to the panel and let you guys make your pitch. I hope that Bobby listens to this space. I hope he listens to the podcast later when he's on a long flight traveling between events, and really takes the time to listen to what the very smart people on this panel have to say. These are very, very smart, experienced people who've been in politics a long time. And we also have some young people who are going to be very important in the campaign this year. We can't win it without you guys. And you bring a lot of innovation and a lot of new ideas, fresh ideas to how we should approach this, historic election of 2024. I think that this is the first time, maybe in the nation's entire history, that there is a viable chance for a third party candidate to maybe even win the darn thing, maybe do way better than Ross Perot did in 1992, better than 20%, better than Teddy Roosevelt did in 1912. I'm talking all the way to the White House. You may say I'm a dreamer.
Lori, to that point, Lori, I completely agree.
You're not the only one. Sorry, go ahead. You're not the only one. Sorry.
That's right.
This is the time. Half the country is now independent. In the last 15 years, the number of independents has gone up, has just exploded. And so there's only a quarter of the country that affiliates with the Democratic Party and another quarter that affiliates with the Republican Party. So independent is kind of already the biggest, political party or identification, so to speak. And being independent allows you to bring people together, as Kennedy already does, from various different kind of ideological perspectives, left and right. That's one of the best things that I think he decided to do in his campaign, is to reach out, to run a campaign that reaches out to people from across the political spectrum. And he's done it very successfully. And there's been conversation, I know, having, been an independent, having left after the 2016 Bernie campaign, there's been conversation about, what if Bernie Sanders, instead of endorsing Hillary Clinton, instead of endorsing Biden 4 years later, what if he had done a dirty break? What if he had left? What if he had joined another political party? What if he had gone independent at that point? Like, what a massive blow that would have been to the duopoly in this country. And that's the kind of opportunity that could possibly exist right now with a candidate that does have that kind of appeal and that ability to reach people from across the political spectrum. It would potentially be the biggest blow to the two-party system. Who knows? Maybe even a fatal blow.
That's what they're afraid
that
of.
That has happened in decades.
Yeah, that's what I truly believe both parties are afraid of. Speaking of innovation, there's a lot of innovation in the way that Kennedy is running his campaign. He's the first candidate in history to accept Bitcoin donations and cryptocurrency. He's put forward some very innovative proposed policy about Bitcoin and backing our dollar with it. He's also, got this innovative idea of not running such a partisan campaign and welcoming people from across the political spectrum. It's also quite innovative in this day and age that he's not running a dirty campaign and he's not attacking his opponents. He's had nothing but really kind things to say about former President Trump. I mean, he'll attack him on the issues, but he doesn't engage in smears. He doesn't try to tear his opponents down. He's even been quite kind to Joe Biden, even though Joe Biden has certainly not been kind to him. So we are looking at innovative approaches. This is a very innovative campaign. We're trying to do something that's never been done before in the whole history of our country. And so speaking of innovation, I'd like to bring in my friend Caleb Maupin, who is the founder of the Center for Political Innovation. And I would just love to bring Caleb into this conversation if I can. I just sent him an invite. Let me try again. I'm not sure if that worked. Let me try this again. Caleb's also a reporter for RT Television News. As you know, a lot of us here probably used to enjoy watching RT America, which is now unfortunately off the air. And it's too bad because RT was the only network that you could get on your local cable or satellite provider that, lets you hear from candidates who were not in the mainstream, who were not Republicans and Democrats. One of the reasons that I really enjoyed RT during the elections of 2012 and 2016 and 2020 was they let us hear from the Libertarian candidates, from the Green Party candidates. Ron Paul was a frequent guest. So was Jill Stein. And people who are outside the mainstream. Unfortunately, we won't have RT America this election cycle unless something should change. It looks like RT is permanently off the air on all cable and satellite providers around the, Western Europe, Canada, the United States. RT is gone. RT is also censored completely on YouTube, as we talked about in our last space. But I wanted to bring Caleb in and get some of his insights because he's actually one of the smartest political observers that I know and really knows his history too, understands electoral politics, and most of all, he understands revolutionary moments. And people, we are in a revolutionary moment. This could turn out to be the most consequential and revolutionary election since the election of 1932, when Franklin Roosevelt defeated incumbent President Herbert Hoover during the Great Depression, and he brought us a New Deal. And I'm hoping that Robert Kennedy will bring the American people a New Deal right now, because boy, do we need one. Not only do we need another JFK, not only do we need another RFK, but I believe we need another FDR. And that's something that Caleb and I talk a lot about when we talk about history. We talk a lot about the FDR presidency, the United Front. Remember, folks, FDR was elected to 4 terms, and he didn't just do that with Democrats only. A lot of Republicans voted for FDR. A majority of the American people wanted to keep FDR as their president, and they did for 4 incredible, unprecedented terms because they liked how he put the people first. So, Caleb, why don't you unmute yourself, join the conversation, and tell us what you think of all this that's going on.
Well, the first thing that I have to say is probably one of the main reasons that I wanted to hop on and say something is because now I have to clarify the Center for Political Innovation is a nonprofit. We do not endorse any candidate. We don't campaign for anybody. But I am a huge fan of Nick Brana. Nick Brana is an utterly dynamic, amazing individual. And I really want the people listening right now to know why and how that is. There was a lot of talk in 2016 among Bernie supporters that maybe in the result of it being so obviously rigged against Bernie Sanders that maybe they ought to go form some new third party. Well, Nick made it happen. He made it happen. He did it. There was talk, last year that there needed to be a new anti-war movement that included a broader tent than just the typical, your typical leftover from the 1960s anti-war marchers. There was talk, maybe we should have a new anti-war movement. Nick made it happen. Rage Against the War Machine. And anyone who's watching Cornel West now, and he's disappointed a lot of us with some of his recent rhetoric, but you watch Cornel West on Fox News, you watch Cornel West on CNN, you watch this campaign that has generated a lot of energy. Nick made that happen. Cornel West running for president was Nick's personal creation. He worked on Cornel West for months, discussed it with him, and ultimately convinced Cornel West to run for president, regardless of how much Cornel may have let us down and moved away from the People's Party. It doesn't matter, because that campaign wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for Nick Brana. Nick makes things happen. And I think that in this age of social media, a lot of people, they want to focus on, what people say. This person used this type of word, they use that type of word, little performative stunts on social media. But we lose track of how important it is to make things happen, to actually make things happen, get things done in the real world, bring people together into the same room to make things happen. And that is what Nick Brana is amazing at. And he's utterly amazing at. And I think about the people I know from the People's Party. They've got a great organizer here in New York City, a guy named Erebus. They've got an organizer in Vermont, a guy named Theo. They've got an organizer in Missouri. Her name is Megan. And these are great people. And, Nick is their leader very much. And he has held them together because they have been subject. I mean, you saw when Cornel West announced, they didn't go after Cornel West at first. They just went after the People's Party.
Yeah, they went after the party, not the candidate. It was crazy.
I know. But Nick has held that group of people together amid everything that has been thrown at them, and they have thrown hell and high water at them. And that is why I am here. I just really want people to understand the importance of Nick Brana. We don't understand in the age of social media how important organizing skills really are, and how important it is to be able to maneuver and negotiate. And the fact that he and Angela McCurdle organized that Rage Against the War Machine protest march that happened, that was historic. You have to remember, there hasn't been a big anti-war rally like that in Washington, D.C. since the invasion of Iraq, since the first term of President Bush. And it was huge, and the establishment pulled out all the stops to try and prevent that rally from happening. But Nick held it together. He got quite a diverse group of people there. He negotiated with the libertarians. He negotiated with the left and with the right and with different commentators and different people. And he did something utterly amazing. And so I really want the audience here to know who Nick is and know how important he is, because we don't put enough stock in action. We give all this attention to words, and I can't hammer that point home enough. I am such an admirer and a fan of Nick Brana, and I really want people to know that. It's been an honor that Nick has come and spoken at Center for Political Innovation events before. It's been an honor to know kind of the inner circle of the People's Party that he pulls off these operations with and gets so much done with. It's a small group of people that's so dedicated and representing, really the sentiments of millions of people in this country. It's really, really dynamic what Nick has done. It's funny, I'm listening to this conversation about RFK and all the things that they're doing to prevent RFK from speaking and to prevent RFK's campaign from being taken seriously. And it puts a smile on my face, because there's a quote that gets thrown around by leftists a lot. And they usually throw it around to mean the opposite of what I'm using it to mean in this context. But it was Emma Goldman. Do folks know Emma Goldman, the famous libertarian, anarchist, socialist figure in the early 20th century? Emma Goldman said, if voting could change anything, they would make it illegal. And usually people quote that to say, oh, you shouldn't vote, it's a waste of time. But it's ironic, because now we're seeing a situation where voting could actually change something. And so they're moving ahead to make it illegal. They didn't have to do that. When Dennis Kucinich ran for president, I remember when I was a kid, every Democrat primary, there was always a far left Democrat, Dennis Kucinich or, Al Sharpton or somebody like that would run. And they wouldn't be taken seriously.
Or the great Mike Gravel. Don't forget good old Mike Gravel, who gave him hell in 2008 on the debate
Or Jerry
stage.
Brown. Jerry Brown often used to be kind of the face of the left wing of the Democratic Party. And they would run a campaign, and they would lose, and they would bow out and tell their supporters to vote for the regular Democrat. And they didn't have to make it illegal. And they didn't have to suppress them on social media. And they didn't have to run big, long, lengthy hit pieces in the New York Times against them. And they didn't have to do any of that. Right? They didn't have to rig the primary against them, because there was no danger of them actually doing anything. But what happened in 2016, I was there at the Philadelphia convention covering it for RT, and what I saw was history in the making. That has never happened before. Even though Bernie wanted to do that, he tried to just bow out and do what they normally do, but the people that supported Bernie Sanders weren't going to take it. And that was history in the making, and things are really changing. And we're entering a situation where voting could actually change things. I mean, where, the kind of candidate that gets elected, you saw how much they are determined to make sure Donald Trump doesn't come back into office, how they're charging him with crimes, how January 6th, they've made that into the event they want to talk about nonstop for highly political reasons. And we're in a period where there are big divisions among our ruling elite, and who you vote for may make a big difference. So I'm not discouraging anyone from voting, but I want to add that, what do people do when they can't vote? What do people do when they feel like their votes are not heard, when their ability to express themselves is not available at the ballot box? They go out and protest. And at the same time that they are tightening up the electoral system and imposing these new rules to push out RFK, they are making it illegal to protest in the United States. And this is something that it's coming from every different angle. I talk about how there's this group called the Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party. They have been indicted by the U.S. federal government. They're facing 10 years in prison for organizing some web conferences, publishing some articles, just criticizing U.S. foreign policy, supporting Russia in the Ukraine conflict. And they want to make that criminal. They want to make that being a foreign agent. And that's really disturbing. And we saw that Marco Rubio recently called for prosecutions of a whole bunch of people for allegedly being Chinese agents. He wants to expand that. We also saw that a group of abortion protesters in Washington, D.C., and forget, I'm pro-choice. There's many people that are anti-choice. That's not the issue here, right? But these anti-abortion protesters in Washington, D.C., during their protest against abortion, they blocked the door to an abortion clinic. Well, that's technically a crime, but they called it conspiracy to violate civil rights. They were convicted in federal court of conspiracy to violate civil rights. And all 5 of them are now facing decades in prison for blocking doors. And I'm thinking about, the United Auto Workers, the UAW, they're going to be on strike pretty soon. The big 3, GM, Chrysler, and Ford, are about to go on strike. What do striking workers do all the time on the picket line? They block the doors. Are they going to prosecute the GM workers if they block a truck from going into the plant when they're on the picket line? Are they going to say that's conspiracy to violate the scab's right to enter the plant, to violate his civil rights? This is insanity. We've seen the huge sentences they've handed down to these January 6th protesters, calling it insurrection, a conspiracy against the government. We can agree that maybe people shouldn't be trespassing into the Capitol. Maybe people shouldn't be engaging in rowdy vandalism. But the sentences they're giving them are astronomical and insane. And that all around, from the left, from the right, from the center, they are cracking down on the freedom to protest right now. And this is something we should all be concerned about. And it parallels, at the same time, the restriction on the elections and the limiting of political discourse and the edging out of some candidates and the tech censorship and all of that. It's part of the same process. I would argue that because of artificial intelligence, there's millions and millions of people that no longer have a place in the process of production at the assembly line. And we have a situation where it's easier than ever to make products, easier than ever before, but the wages that are being paid out to people are not enough to buy them back. This is a long-term crisis of overproduction. And so they're trying to stabilize society with a heavy-handed crackdown. This is some kind of fascism that's gradually emerging. That's not an epithet to be thrown at any individual. That's the direction U.S. society is going in. We're moving towards some kind of authoritarian fascist state based on the fundamental breakdown of our economic system. And that, we see the economic problems that are on the horizon, and that is the basis for the rising unrest. That's also the basis for the centralization of power and the authoritarianism that we're seeing. But in this context, with our ability to vote being, and the elections being more and more controlled and less free and democratic, and with threats to the ability to protest, I would argue that what Nick and Angela McCurdle and so many others did last February is something that needs to be done more than ever. We need to show the government, the war makers, the billionaires, the military. We need to show those forces that we are not afraid to use our free speech, that we are not afraid to protest. I am excited about, the continued work of the Rage Against the War Machine Coalition. I understand there may be some plans in the process coming up for some more actions by the Rage Against the War Machine Coalition, and I really hope that's the case, because what they did last year was so dynamic, what they did back in February. But I also want to mention that one thing we are planning to do as the Center for Political Innovation is coming up in December, which is quite a long way away. I mean, it's only September here. We are planning in December 2nd in Portland, Oregon. We are planning to have an all-day anti-imperialist mega rally that we are going to have. It's going to be in Portland, Oregon. We have a beautiful venue that we've already reserved. It's just a beautiful facility that has agreed to facilitate us, that is not worried about attacks on free speech, etc. It holds 250 people. We are going to fill that place up for an all-day rally with libertarians, with socialists, with anti-war voices, progressives and conservatives and MAGA people, and anyone who's against the drive for war. We are going to have buses from Seattle to take people from Seattle to Portland. We're going to have buses from Northern California to take people up to Portland. And we are going to fill that auditorium and have a one-day mega rally in Portland, Oregon, themed around opposing imperialism. And we are sponsoring it. And, we're talking to different people. I've talked to Nick and some others about, coming to be speakers, et cetera. And we want this event in Portland, Oregon to go down in history as a moment where people came together to say, we are not afraid. We are not afraid. We see the direction this country is going in, and we are going to join arm in arm with people we may not necessarily agree with, people that we might have differences with. We are going to join arm in arm with them to build the movement that this country desperately needs. They want us to sit at home and be isolated on the internet. They want us to sit at home and critique each other and try to claim we're the most revolutionary or we're the best. But what matters is the kind of stuff that Nick does, is when he makes things happen. And that's what the Center for Political Innovation wants to do. We want to make things happen. We want to give a voice to people from different perspectives who oppose the way things are going. We want to build a community of anti-imperialists and resistance. And so we are committed to making it happen. Look, the winter is a cold time to have big outdoor rallies. It snows, etc. So we're going to have basically an indoor day of strategy meetings and speeches and all of that. Beautiful venue in Portland, Oregon. And I hope that people will put that on their calendar and remember it because it's going to be important. And people from around the country are coming in, from Chicago, from Florida, from different places like that. We think that this is a turning point. This is a time that's going to be looked back on in American history. People remember the 60s. People remember the 1930s. People remember the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln. We are entering such times. And, you can view it, we're constantly viewing it as, oh, we're living in hard times. Oh, the world's coming to an end. I think we should have the opposite perspective. We're lucky. We're so lucky to be living in these times because we're going to be remembered as the Americans who made history, right? People are going to look back on the people living in 2023 the way they look back on George Washington and the people in the winter at Valley Forge that endured all of that. People are going to look back on us the way they look back on Abraham Lincoln and Harriet Tubman and the beautiful coalition they built to defeat slavery. We are lucky because we have the opportunity to rediscover the heroism that flows through the blood of the American people, to kind of get over this image of a drugged up culture of lazy people who don't believe in anything anymore. We have been given an opportunity by history to really rediscover who we are. So I'm very excited, and I try to keep an optimistic perspective on living in these times because, I feel like we wouldn't have been born in the time that we were born, and we wouldn't be active politically now if there wasn't some kind of higher power that felt that we were up to the challenge, that felt that we were the ones who should be right here, right now to get this done. So I want to encourage everyone who's listening right now, everyone who supports RFK, everyone who supports Cornel West, everyone who's campaigning for the libertarians. I know Mike Mater is a libertarian who's a big supporter of anti-war activism. It was an honor to meet him at August 6th at the big anti-war rally we had here in New York City. That was really, really great. And I know there's a lot of different voices. I think one of the socialist groups announced a candidate. But let's build some action in the street. Let's defend the right to free and open and fair elections. And let's plan to build a in real life anti-war movement. That is my perspective here. And I want to thank Lori. Lori, you invite me on these spaces so many times, and I'm honored every time you do it, And you yourself have been subject to so much tech censorship, right? They are terrified of you. How many YouTube channels have you set up that they've shut down now?
Oh my gosh, I've lost count,
It's
Caleb. I've
wild.
lost
It's
count.
wild. It is utterly wild. Well, I am on your side.
Maverick News is in YouTube jail right now. Our main Maverick News channel is still on a 2-week ban from YouTube. So it's ongoing.
Absolutely. Well, I'm here to just tell you how great your guest Nick Brana is. To also salute you for keeping this YouTube space or this Twitter space community alive and all that you do, and just encourage everyone to keep a positive attitude as we build. It's time to build. It's time to connect with people. It's time to join arm in arm. Now is the time.
Couldn't agree more. And that's what I love about you, Caleb, and what I love about Nick and Christina Tobin. You guys aren't just talkers. You're doers. You do stuff. And you're a frequent guest with us on Maverick News, and you've been on Strange Bedfellows podcast with me many times. I love talking to you. I love getting your insights. And I wanted to ask you a question because you're probably the most impartial person on this panel. CPI, your organization is not partisan. It's not a political party. Of course, with Bobby Kennedy exploring other alternatives to the Democratic Party, naturally, we're bringing a lot of people into this space tonight, asking them to make their pitch for their party. Why Kennedy should run with the Republicans, why Kennedy should run with the Libertarians or the Greens or the Forward Party or the People's Party or independent, no party at all. But you're coming at this from a different perspective in that you're not a partisan, you're not a member of any party, you're not leading any party, and you really don't have a dog in this fight. So I feel like you're maybe the most impartial voice that we have on this panel, and you're also one of the smartest political observers that I know. So I just wanted to ask you, Caleb, do you think that Bobby Kennedy should leave the Democratic Party, and what do you think is the best path forward for Kennedy and his campaign?
I always tell people that, if somebody doesn't want you, there's no reason to stick around. I mean, if they've gone to the length of not having a debate, and they're not even going to have debates, just to make clear they don't want to treat RFK like a real candidate. They're trying to claim he's a Trump, surrogate, etc. I mean, it looks to me like sticking in the Democratic Party is not really going to help RFK at all. Now, again, I'm giving that perspective. Now, would he run as a third party candidate? I mean, I'm curious about the ability of him to get on the ballot, because that's going to be a challenge. Because, if he's not being treated as a real candidate by the Democratic Party, he needs to then make sure he can get on the ballot with another party. And that's going to be a challenge. So if he's going to make a decision to leave the Democratic Party, he needs to do it soon. If not, his campaign is going to end. Is going to end as soon as the Democratic primary ends. And we have a feeling the Democratic primary is going to end without him being treated as a serious candidate. And so I would think that if he needs to leave the Democratic Party, he should do it soon. Whether he's going to run as an independent and have people petition to get him on the ballot, or run with a third party or multiple third parties, right? I mean, there's no law that says only one third party can endorse somebody, right? I think he needs to make that decision as soon as he possibly can. That's all I can say about that. And, like I said, I do want to make clear, I'm not here to endorse any candidate or campaign for anybody. And, there are things that RFK has said I disagree with, just like there are things Cornel West has said or others that have said. And I'm not, my role is not as a political campaigner. I'm not partisan in all of this, but I'm just reflecting based on the question you asked about, strategy. If he's going to leave, he ought to do it soon. That's all I can say about that. And that, RFK, it reminds me of so many of these socialists and communists that I talk to, where it has been made overwhelmingly clear to them by the Democrats that the Democrats do not want them. The Democrats don't want their support. The Democrats don't want them to go out and campaign for them. The Democrats don't want them to lead anti-Trump mobilizations. So why are they campaigning for the Democrats? Why are they joining this Stop Trump facade? I heard that debate where Cornel West and Jimmy Dore were going at it. And Cornel West is repeating, oh, Trump is a fascist. Trump is a fascist. What do you gain by saying that, right? That's the rhetoric of the Democrats that leads people to vote for the Democratic Party. You're running against the Democrats. I mean, and it's just, there is this abusive relationship between the Democratic Party and the so-called progressive left or the socialists, where they go out and campaign for the Democrats, and the Democrats don't give them anything, and in some cases do the exact opposite of what they want, and they every time go back to the table and vote for the Democrats. And it's just, sometimes you have to be objective and you have to say, look, I know you're trying to scare us with Trump said this or Trump did that, but we survived 4 years under Trump. And Trump wouldn't have won if there had been a real alternative to him that actually could deliver on things. So, and Trump was president for 4 years. We didn't die. So maybe people need to just kind of say, look, Trump getting elected is not the end of the world. Trump being a fascist or being the equivalent of Hitler, as much as I might disagree with things he did, that's ridiculous, right? We didn't all go to gas chambers and die during the Trump presidency. And many of the things I objected to about Donald Trump are worse under Biden. So, based on that, I think people need to just kind of say, look, we're not getting anything out of this relationship with the Democratic Party, whether it's a straight up campaigning for the Democrats or whether it's claiming to be independent, but always, having this underlying message of the right wing or the main threat. Trump is a fascist. I think a lot of people on the so-called progressive left need to just look themselves in the mirror and say, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this at this time? Because what I saw at the Philadelphia convention in 2016, that was history in the making, right? That is a turning point. And if people can't wake up now and say, the Democratic Party doesn't want us, we can go elsewhere, I don't know what's going to wake them up.
Me neither. And, speaking of Trump and the Republican Party, and I'm hoping that if we have any Republicans here in this space who would like to speak, who would like to make a case, as if you were talking to Bobby himself, if you were sitting in the room with him and you wanted him to switch parties, leave the Democrats and join the Republican Party, if you think he could beat Trump for the nomination, I would love to hear from you. I would really be curious to hear your thoughts. I have invited several Republicans into the space, and I hope they will join. I hope they will speak up. Unfortunately, folks, we are dealing with a rigged two-party system. As we talked about earlier, independent candidates, third-party candidates have a very difficult time getting ballot access, getting access to the debate stage. The debates are rigged. So, that kind of leaves Kennedy weighing, do I run as a Republican or do I run as a Democrat? According to the poll I'm running, there isn't much support, it seems, for him to make a run with the Republican Party. I'm only seeing about 8% are wanting him to run as a Republican right now. But, let's be honest. I think if he did switch parties and run as a Republican, he would have a much better shot in that party. Their primary system is more fair. They don't have super delegates. He would have a chance to be on the debate stage. He would be allowed to debate. They are having debates on the Republican side this year. And I think he would mop the floor with most of the Republican candidates. I would love to see him debate Donald Trump. And I hope that if he did choose to go Republican, that debate would happen with Donald Trump. I think it would be amazing to watch. And yes, I do believe that Robert Kennedy could defeat Donald Trump and win the Republican nomination. And then Biden would have to debate him. So you see, there's a method to my madness here and why I'm coming at it from that direction. But the main thing that I notice, and I've been a volunteer for this campaign since day one, is that the majority of our donors, of our supporters, the people who really love Bobby and have embraced him, are on the right. People who were once Republicans, maybe they're still Republicans, but they really like him. They like his message. And many of them say to me that they feel Kennedy would actually drain the swamp. Donald Trump said he was going to drain the swamp, and he promised to do a lot of things. But then he failed us in so many ways. I supported Trump in 2016. I did not support him in 2020 because he lost me right off the bat when he became president, and immediately his Justice Department and his CIA and Mike Pompeo said that going after WikiLeaks was going to be a big priority. And sure enough, they did. They arrested Julian Assange. They dragged him out of the Ecuadorian embassy, kicking and screaming. They are prosecuting him under the Espionage Act. They're looking to lock Assange up for 175 years simply for doing journalism, and they are murdering him. Remember, it was Trump's CIA under Mike Pompeo who had a plan to kidnap or even assassinate Julian Assange, a journalist. That to me is just shocking. Also, Trump lost me when he had the chance in October 2017 to declassify and release all of the secret JFK files 60 years after the assassination of President Kennedy. We're coming up on the 60th anniversary here in November. And Trump had every opportunity. It came up on his watch twice. And he said he was going to do it. He said, I'm going to release it all. I'm going to release everything. And then he didn't. Trump also armed Ukraine. He sent more money and weapons to Ukraine than any president before him in his time. Now, of course, he did not start a war with Russia. I don't think he was crazy enough to do that. But he did, lay the groundwork for the war that we're in right now and that Biden has escalated beyond all imagination. So I actually feel that Bobby Kennedy might do pretty well in the Republican Party. I realize that's probably not a popular opinion here with my friends on the left. They might not want to see that. And yes, there is the question, would Democrats actually defect and bring themselves to hold their nose and vote for a Republican, maybe for the first time in their entire lives? I think they would probably be more likely to vote for an independent so that they don't feel that they've gone to the dark side and, joined the Republican Party. But, that never bothered me. I voted for Ron Paul time and time again. Even though I'm a libertarian and he's a Republican, I understood that he was the best man for the job, and it didn't matter to me which party he was running in. I feel very much the same way about Kennedy if he switches parties. Again, I left the Democratic Party 30 years ago. I can't stand the Democratic Party. It's going to hurt a lot if I have to go change my voter registration next year back to Democrat for the first time in 30 years. But I'll do it. If he wants to run as a Democrat, fine. I'll support him. I'll vote for him. I don't care what party he's in. I just want him to run. I want him to win. I don't want this to be a campaign that's just about making a point or starting a conversation. I know a lot of people say, well, that's good enough. As long as we're having the national conversation about these issues, then Bobby has succeeded. And I say, no, I want better than that. You might have noticed here at the top of this space why I'm so passionate about this. I started trying to convince Bobby to run for the White House 16 years ago, back in 2007. I saw Barack Obama coming. I knew that Barack Obama was a fraud. I knew that Barack Obama was going to damage this country, and I feel that he did. Of course, after 8 years of Bush, I wanted Kennedy even then. So this means a lot to me. This run is my dream come true. It's everything that I've been hoping for and trying to persuade Bobby to do for 16 years. So I'm not in this to make a point, folks. I'm not in this to have a conversation. I'm in this to win. I really, truly believe that Bobby Kennedy is our only hope to save our country, to stop this war, to keep us out of World War III, to prevent us from going into a nuclear confrontation, or worse, a nuclear war. I feel he can fix the economy. I feel he can bring us a new deal, the likes of which we haven't seen since FDR, or at least since LBJ's Great Society. A better deal, a more equitable deal for the American people who are just getting screwed left and right. And the Democratic Party, in my humble opinion, again, I don't speak for Kennedy or anybody else but me, I feel that the Democratic Party is, for all intents and purposes, the CIA's political party. There, I said it. When you look at the Democratic Party and the way that they operate and who's behind the scenes and who's running that party, I believe that it's the CIA. I think it's infiltrated to the hilt with CIA people. And it is, if the CIA had a political party, it would be the Democratic Party. When you vote for the Democrats, you're casting a vote for the CIA. And that's just my opinion for what it's worth. But would anybody else like to comment on that before we move to the next topic?
I just really wanted to say, Lori, I wanted to elevate something that Caleb said, and I have tremendous respect for Caleb as an organizer and his dedication to organizing. A quote of Dick Cheney's actually came to mind. And in 2005, he was interviewed by New York Times reporter Ron Suskind. And he said, and this New York Times reporter was questioning him on the Iraq War, and Cheney got frustrated, and he said, you know what? We here, in the White House, in the deep state, we are history's actors. We do things, and ultimately, you all up there, in the media and in the public, you all are just passengers. You're just passive observers of what we do. And you can analyze and observe our reality. And then when we choose to, we'll act again and we'll just change reality for you. Because ultimately, you have no power or say in the matter. And what Caleb was saying is really what I love about this call and this meeting. This is a group of organizers. This is a group of people who won't just take it passively. This is a group of people who will have a vision and they will go out there and make it happen. Lori, you, Caleb, you, Christina with Free and Equal for the last 15 years in the debates. Irene, a founder of Humanity for Peace here. Jose was with us with the Schiller Institute, with his incredibly courageous anti-war interventions. I saw Jonathan Blazer here, a member of CPI with Caleb. He did the intervention against Bernie Sanders with me in Pittsburgh. I've seen members of the People's Party here. We make things happen. And those people, all of you, you're my party. You're my family. You're the people that I want to be working with because you're the people that are going to change things.
You're darn right we will.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.